Hello everyone, welcome to HFY Beyond Terror. This channel is all about HFY and sci-fi stories, where humanity's underestimated and then proves...
Rian Mercer's spanner slipped, rang off the ducting, and vanished into the darkness with a metallic clatter. He lay there a moment, cheek pressed to warm alloy, breathing through his teeth. Station heat exchanged 3 hours of crawling. Through a tunnel barely wide enough for his shoulders, and the coolant alarm still pulsed somewhere behind the bulkheads like a stubborn headache. He wriggled backward until he could drop onto open decking. Grease streaked his sleeves. His knees throbbed from impact bruises he'd stopped noticing years ago. 8 years keeping other people's ships alive had taught him a simple truth. Every species swore their engineering was elegant, and almost none of it made sense to a human. His belt cum crackled. Mercer, Bay 7, now priority. Rian closed his eyes. My shift ended an hour ago. This isn't the station's problem, the dispatcher said. It's a Sirathi transport. Emergency repair. They asked for you by name. Rian sat up so fast he clipped his head on the duct lip. Sirathi. Most techs wouldn't touch a Sirathi craft. Not because it was dangerous, though it could be, but because it was wrong in a way humans felt in their teeth. Starships grown like bone and coral, circuitry that pulsed, metal that flexed as if it had a pulse of its own. I'm on my way, he said, and heard the faint tremor in his own voice. Bay 7 sat across the ring, past cargo lanes and customs gates. The express lift shot him through the station's spine, light streaking in narrow lines. Rian tried to recall what he knew. Sirathi were old space royalty, all heat and ceremony, their diplomacy sharp as blades. Their ships weren't built, they were cultivated over decades in volcanic forges. You didn't repair them so much as persuade them to stop dying. The bay doors opened. Rian's boots slowed without him meaning to. The Sirathi vessel crouched in the dock like a living thing at rest, huge, arched, its outer plates layered. Like scaled armor that shifted color as if reconsidering what it wanted to be. A ramp extended to the deck. At its base stood 3 Sirathi, taller than any human. Wing fins folded tight along their backs, eyes lit with ember glow in the dim. One stepped forward. Its voice rolled like stones in a furnace. You are the human mechanic. Rian nodded, throat dry. Rian Mercer. What failed? Cooling flow to the nursery chamber. Our forge engineer died during translation. We cannot mend this section without desecration. The word landed heavy. Show me, Rian said, because saying no felt like stepping away from a fire alarm. Inside, the air tasted of heated mineral and something faintly sweet sap, maybe. The corridors were narrow and curved, walls neither metal nor flesh but a compromise between them. If he listened too closely, he could almost imagine a slow, deep rhythm behind the plates. They stopped at a sealed door framed with inlaid obsidian. Beyond this threshold, the Sirathi said, is our hatchery. Heat is rising. The young are not yet hardened. Rian's gaze flicked to the guard's claws-clean ceremonial. The ship treated this place like a temple. Understood. He murmured and stepped through. The heat hit like an open kill. Lines ran along the ceiling, braided tubes that looked like veins reinforced with mesh. One junction wept a thick, translucent fluid that hissed as it struck hot air, sending up pale vapor. Rian moved between rows of incubation cradles. Each cradle held a single egg the size of his torso, luminous from within as if a small sunrise. Had been sealed behind shell. The leak came from a coupling cracked, stressed by a microfracture. On a human ship, it would be a 10-minute job. He pulled tools from his kit and set his jaw. Okay, easy. Replace the collar. Seal. Pressure check. Done. He had the old coupling halfway off when the alarms began. Not the steady station chirp, this was a screaming, layered wail. Red light washed the chamber. The ship's voice, cold and automated, boomed through hidden vents. Containment protocol engaged. Lockdown in progress. Evacuate immediately. Rian's head snapped up. The leaking fluid, whatever it was, had caught. Fire crawled along the ceiling in a hungry sheet, not flickering but racing, as if it knew the shortest path to everything it could consume. The walls themselves darkened. Blistering, Rian lunged for the hatch. The door slammed shut with a shuddering clang. Heavy locks engaged, each one a deep final thump. Trapped. Smoke thickened. Heat slammed into his lungs. He spun, searching for an override panel, a manual crank anything. Then he heard it. A thin, frantic sound that didn't belong to alarms. Or machinery. A cry small, sharp, terrified. Rian's eyes found the source. One cradle had split open. Shell fragments lay around it like shattered porcelain. A hatchling, tiny, slick-winged, no bigger than a house cat, scrabbled onto the deck. Its scales were pale, almost iridescent, and its eyes shone gold in the emergency lights. It cried. Again as flames crept closer, licking toward the cradle row. Protocol screamed in Rian's head. Abandon section. Let fire systems do their job. Preserve your life. But the hatchling stumbled, too weak to stand. Its wings trembled like wet paper. Rian's body moved before his brain finished arguing. An emergency cabinet hung beside the door, blankets, masks, suppression gel. He ripped it open, dragged out a thermal wrap, and threw it over his shoulders. The fabric was meant to buy you seconds, not miracles. He ran. Heat punched through the wrap. Smoke burned his eyes. He dropped to hands and knees, crawled the last meters, and felt blindly for the hatchling. His fingers met warm, ridged scales. The creature shuddered when he touched it, then, recognizing contact, pressed into his palm with desperate trust. "Got you," Rian rasped, though it couldn't understand words. He tucked it against his chest under the wrap. The hatchlings. Cry cut off, replaced by a tight, trembling chirp. Rian turned back. A beam fell from above, trailing sparks. It smashed across his shoulder and drove him to the deck hard enough to knock the breath from him. Pain flashed white. His left arm went numb. The hatchling squeaked, claws digging into his shirt. "Move," he told himself. "Move or you both die." He dragged himself forward, one-handed, the other arm locked around the small body under the wrap. Flames roared. The air turned heavy as molten glass. His vision tunneled. Then, hands strong, Claude closed around his shoulders and hauled him backward as if he weighed nothing. Another set of hands took his legs. The world lurched. Cold air slammed into his face. Rian hit the deck outside the hatchery and coughed, until his throat bled. Suppression foam whooshed into the sealed chamber behind him. Sirathi shouted in their rolling language, voices sharp with fear and fury. Rian looked down. His forearms were blistered, skin angry red. His hands were blackened, in places where the wrap had slipped. The hatchling still clung to him, trembling but alive. It lifted its head and stared at him with molten gold eyes. A Sirathi voice said, stunned and low, "You carried one of our unsoftened through flame," Rian tried to answer. Darkness took him. He woke to white ceilings and the clean scent of antiseptic. For a moment he thought he died and landed in an overfunded hospital. Then he tried to sit up and his body refused. Every muscle screamed. Bandages pulled tight across his ribs and shoulder. "Do not strain," a deep voice said, and Rian turned his head. An elder Sirathi sat beside the bed. Its scales were weathered. Copper, its eyes old enough to have watched suns go out. It studied him with the calm of someone who did not waste surprise. "The hatchling," Rian croaked. She lives," the elder said. "And she refuses to leave you." He gestured with one claw. At the foot of the bed, Curled like a cat on a folded blanket, the hatchling slept. Even asleep, it held a possessive coil, one wing draped over the fabric as if claiming territory. Relief hit Rian so hard he almost laughed. "You have been unconscious for 3 days," the elder continued. "Your burns should have ended you, yet you mend." Rian shifted his arms enough to see his skin. The burned layers were gone. In their place, faint lines traced his forearms, patterns that glowed softly, as if starlight had been stitched beneath the surface. They pulsed in time with his heartbeat. "What?" he whispered. The elder leaned forward. "You bear an ashbund," Rian frowned. "A what?" "A vow the Sirathi do not give lightly, not given at all, in living memory." The elder's voice hardened. "It marks those who choose the lives of others over their own." "I didn't," Rian began. "I didn't do anything special. She was crying." The elder's gaze didn't waver. "Many hear cries. Few walk into fire." The hatchling stirred, blinked, and made a soft chirrup at the sound of his voice. It scrambled upright and waddled across the bed, then settled against Rian's side. With a sigh like warm steam, the elder's expression, when it softened, looked like molten metal cooling. "Her name is Ember. She has chosen you as clutch keeper." "That's a mistake," Rian said weakly. "It is a bond," the elder corrected, "not a mistake." Rian spent days in the medical bay while Sirathi healers checked his vitals, with instruments that felt more like rituals than scans. His temperature ran higher than human baseline, but they insisted he was stable. The glowing lines under his skin weren't scars, and they weren't ink. They responded to emotion, brightening when fear spiked, dimming when he calmed. And he could understand the Sirathi now fully, without translation. One morning the elder returned, accompanied by guards whose presence made the room feel smaller. "My name is Varric Brightscale," the elder said. "I speak for the Forge Council," Rian swallowed. "Why can I understand you?" "Because the ashband reshapes you to carry it," Brightscale said. "Comprehension is the first kindness it offers. Others follow." "I don't want gifts," Rian said. "I want to go back to work. I have family." You have responsibilities," Brightscale cut in not unkindly. "The hatchling will mature over 2 decades by your measure. Until then, her safety is yours." Rian stared at Ember. She had climbed onto his chest and was kneading his shirt with tiny claws, utterly content. "This is insane," he whispered. Brightscale's eyes narrowed. "Insane is what our enemies will call it." "Enemies?" "News travels faster than ships," Brightscale said. "Some will fear what you represent. Others will desire it." A knot tightened in Rian's gut. "What do you mean by represent?" Brightscale rose. "You will come to Cinderhold, our home world. There, the council will judge your bond. If it is true, you will be recognized. If it is false," Rian's mouth went dry. "If it's false, you will not survive the rite." Ember made a small, annoyed sound, as if offended by the implication that her choice could be questioned. "How long do I have?" Rian asked. 3 days. Then we depart," Brightscale said. "With or without you?" When the elder left, Rian lay back and stared at the ceiling while Ember curled into the hollow of his shoulder like she belonged there. He thought about his sister on Havenline Colony, about the messages she sent about her kids learning to read, about the money he wired home every month, about the promise he'd made to visit when he could afford passage. He thought about the moment in the hatchery when his body moved on its own. Fire didn't care about promises. Neither did a crying child. On the 3rd morning, he found Brightscale at the dock. "I'm coming," Rian said. "I'll learn what this means, and I'll keep her safe." Brightscale's teeth showed in what might have been approval. "Good. Before he could board, station security intercepted him. "Mercer," the officer said, uneasy. "We need to warn you. The Kale Syndicate issued a contract on you an hour ago. Massive bounty." Rian went cold. "Why?" "They're calling you a fraud, claiming you stole Sirathi Biotech to fake the bond." The officer rubbed the back of his neck. "We're neutral. If the Syndicate comes, station policy says we can't shelter you." Brightscale appeared at Rian's side like a storm front. "He is under Sirathi protection." "We're not arresting him," the officer said quickly. "Just get out now." Rian looked down at Ember perched on his forearm, blinking sleepily, unaware the galaxy had decided she was leverage. "Then we leave now," Rian said. "The trip to Cinderhold took 6 days along routes that didn't exist in public nav charts." The Sirathi ship moved through folds in space like something swimming through hot currents. Ember grew too fast for Rian's nerves. Her scales deepened from pale opal to rich sapphire. Her wings strengthened enough for short glides down corridors. She followed him everywhere, even into maintenance bays, where she sat on his shoulder and watched him work with solemn fascination. Brightscale taught him Sirathi etiquette the way a smith teaches a blade, directly, without apology. How to address elders. When to avert his eyes. What gestures were respect and which were insults. "You will be tested," Brightscale said. "One night, not because we doubt you. Because belief is dangerous without proof." "How did they test me?" Rian asked, though his stomach already knew. Brightscale's eyes reflected the ship's warm light. "White fire." Rian exhaled through his nose. "Of course it's fire. You walked into flame once." "The bond did not stop you," Brightscale said. "The bond may stop the flame now." Cinderhold was not a gentle world. Volcano chains split the horizon. Rivers of lava braided through black stone canyons. Cities clung to cliff faces like grown crystal, architecture carved from basalt and reinforced with gleaming, living metal. The sky was amber with ash. Heat shimmered above the ground. Rian stepped down the ramp with Ember clinging to his shoulder. He expected to suffocate. Instead, the faint lines under his skin warmed, then settled, regulating the heat until it felt like a summer day. Hundreds of Sirathi watched his arrival in silence. Towering elders, young winged scouts, artisans, warriors. Their expressions were unreadable in the way predators' faces often were still, intent, assessing. They led him to a hall carved into the caldera wall. 12 elders sat in a crescent, their scales scarred by age and battle. "Approach," one said. Rian walked forward. Ember pressed close to his neck and made a nervous, rattling chirp. "You?" "Bear the ash bond," another elder said. "Show us." Rian rolled up his sleeves. The patterns brightened, threads of gold-blue light twining along his forearms as if responding to scrutiny. A smaller elder stepped down from the crescent. Her presence made the air heavy. "I am Speaker Shenra. The marks are genuine." Rian let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd held. Shenra's eyes narrowed. "But worth is not proven by marks alone." "Dawn tomorrow. The white fire right." Rian swallowed. "If I fail?" Shenra didn't answer. She didn't need to. At dawn, they dressed him in simple robes and took him deep beneath the city, downstairs cut into volcanic rock. The heat rose. With every step, the air grew thick, mineral-rich. The chamber they entered was circular, walls glossy black. At its center, a pit of white flame that moved like a living thing, stretching upward in slow, grasping tongues. Galleries above overflowed with Sirathi. Ember was held by Brightscale, her eyes wide, her claws gripping his scaled arm. "Speaker." Shenra stood at the rim of the pit. "This fire does not only burn flesh," she said. "It burns falsehood. It reveals intent." Rian's throat tightened. I'm ready. He stepped forward. The heat hit, and for an instant he thought the bond had lied. Pain flared, not in skin but in memory. The white fire peeled him open and held him up to his own worst moments. Every selfish thought, every time he turned away from someone. Elsa's trouble because he was tired. Every quiet resentment. Then it showed him the hatchery. Ember's cry. His hands moving before his fear. The beam falling. His body crawling anyway. Save her, his mind had shouted over and over, until the words were the only thing left. The white fire surged, searching, testing. Rian didn't fight it. He didn't bargain. He let it see everything. And then the pain eased. He was standing in the center of the pit, untouched. The flame curled around him like a guard dog that recognized its own. His marks blazed brighter than the fire-golden, radiant steady. The galleries erupted in a roar that shook dust from the ceiling. Speaker Shenra's voice cut through it, sharp with shock. Not ash-bonded alone, she said. First kindled. Rian staggered out of the pit on trembling legs. First kindled? He rasped. Shenra's expression held something like sorrow. A title for those who appear when the world is about to change. Rian opened his mouth to ask what that meant. The chamber exploded. Stone cracked. Dust and shards rained down. Screams rose as armored figures poured into the lower hall's sleek black plating, weapons humming. Kel assassins, someone shouted. Brightscale shoved Ember into Rian's arms as energy bolts ripped through stone. Move! Rian ran with Ember clutched to his chest, the hatchling's heart hammering against his ribs. The right had barely ended, and the war had already begun. They reached a healing sanctum as the fight raged above. Doors sealed. Healers dragged the wounded in scorched wings, broken limbs, blood too dark to be human. Rian's hands shook. Ember crouched beside him, bristling, making a low sound that was half growl, half plea. A young Sirathi, barely older than Ember, still small, was carried in and laid down, bleeding from a dozen wounds. The healers looked once and shook their heads. Too far gone, one murmured. We can ease the passing. No, Rian said, and surprised himself with how hard his voice came out. He knelt beside the wounded youth. His marks flared without. Permission, warmth building under his skin like a furnace igniting. Human, Brightscale started. I don't know what I'm doing, Rian said, honestly. But I can't watch her die. He placed his hands over the worst wounds. Light spilled from his palms, gold threaded with blue, and sank into torn flesh. He felt the other's pain like it was his own, felt life slipping away like coolant. Through a cracked line. Something inside him reached deep, instinctive, and offered itself. The marks drank, then poured. The wounded Sirathi's breathing steadied. Blood slowed. Torn tissue drew together imperfectly, but enough. Enough. To keep her here. Rian collapsed backward, dizzy, as if he'd run a marathon in heavy gravity. The healers stared. Brightscale's eyes widened with something close to fear. You shared your life. It seemed fair, Rian mumbled, eyelids heavy. She saved children. Speaker Shenra, ash-smudged and grim, appeared beside the Centesimo. Bed later. The assassins are dead or captured, she said. We lost 37. Mostly civilians. Rian's stomach turned. Why me? Why do they care so much? Shenra looked away. The Kal Syndicate controls the sector's trade arteries. Unity threatens them. A first kindled threatens them even more. Brightscale entered, voice-like. Gravel. We took one assassin alive. The Syndicate is massing ships at our borders. They demand we surrender you. Then surrender me, Rian said immediately. I won't. Ember climbed onto the bed and planted herself between him. And the elders, tiny but furious. No. Everyone froze. Rian blinked. You? spoke. Ember's voice was high, clear, trembling with rage. He is mine. Clutch Keeper. No one takes him. Speaker Shenra's expression softened for a heartbeat. Bond voice, she murmured. It comes with protectiveness. Brightscale's gaze sharpened. There is worse. Genetic scans after the attack confirmed something we feared. Rian's skin went cold. What? Ember looked up at him, innocent eyes bright. Brightscale said, she is last of the Ember line. Royal blood. If she reaches maturity, she is heir to Cinderhold's throne. Rian stared at the hatchling, then rubbed his face with a bandaged hand. So I'm not just a mechanic with a glowing rash. I'm what? A regent? Guardian? Keeper? Political target, Shenra said. All at once, Rian let out a thin laugh that sounded close to panic. I should have stayed in that duct. Ember chirped and headbutted his palm as if scolding him for the joke. The syndicate didn't wait for threats to cool. They invoked an ancient Concord law. Accusation resolved by public challenge. Trial by contest, Shenra told him. Mifyu. Refuse, the Concord declares you guilty by default. And if I accept? You face their champion, Brightscale said. Unarmed, in full broadcast, Rian stared at them. I fix coolant lines. You fix what breaks, Shenra said. And the galaxy is breaking. So 3 days later, Rian stood at the Concord Forum, an enormous station city filled with every species he'd only ever seen in Xenotech manuals. Representatives crowded a tiered amphitheater around a combat dais. The Cal delegation watched from a prime tier, their bodies insectal, their shells engraved with trade sigils like trophies. Neutral technicians scanned Rian's marks, his blood, his cells. Their conclusion echoed through the chamber. No implants. No manufactured tech. Only a symbiosis no one could replicate. It didn't matter. The Keel leader's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Then we will test him another way. Our champion will face yours. A gate opened. Something huge stepped onto the platform, part flesh, part machine, towering, scarred with battle history. Rian's throat tightened so hard he could barely breathe. Ember pressed against his ankle, heat and certainty radiating through their bond. Like a pulse. Stand, she seemed to say. Always stand. The contest began. The champion hit like a freight shuttle. Ribs cracking, air punched from lungs, blood bright on the floor. Rian slid across the dais and heard the crowd inhale. His marks blazed. Pain didn't vanish, but bones knit enough for him to rise again. He didn't know how to fight. He couldn't match strength. So he did the only thing he'd ever been good at. He endured. Again and again he stood. The champion shouted in rage, "Why do you rise?" Rian spat blood and smiled through swelling lips. Because someone has to. And hours stretched into forever. The champion's movement slowed as power reserves drained. Its breath turned ragged. Rian took a step forward, not attacking, simply refusing to fall. The champion backed away. A hush swept the forum like a wave. Then, quietly, the champion lowered its head. I submit. Rian's knees hit the deck. Every nerve screamed. He tasted iron and smoke. But through the bond he felt Ember's fierce joy bright enough to drown the pain. The Arbiter's voice rang out. The accusations are dismissed. The bond is recognized. The first kindled stands proven. As medical teams swarmed, a new transmission cut through emergency channels. A distress call. A human colony. Haven line. Rian's blood iced. His sister's voice broke through static. Terrified. Anyone please, unknown ships, plasma fire children. Trapped. If the dragon-marked human hears this, help us. The message died. Rian tried to stand and almost fell. Shenra's gaze was unreadable. We do not involve ourselves in human disputes. Rian looked up, fury and fear twisting together. That's my family. Ember stepped forward, wings flaring. Then it is our dispute. One by one, other delegations rose crystal-bodied. Archivists, nomad fleets, union patrols. The public had watched a battered human refuse to quit until a monster surrendered. The story had done what laws could not. It had made people care. Shenra exhaled, as if conceding to gravity. The Sirathi do not abandon those under Ashbond. Brightscale's voice dropped to a warning. If we go, we may face our own exiles. The Gloamwing. They despise the bond. Rian's hands curled into fists. Then we faced them. A coalition fleet formed in hours. They jumped hard and fast. When they arrived, Havenline burned settlements aflame beneath a bruised sky. 3 raider ships circled like predators, tearing apart defense grids and harvesting prisoners. A transmission came through from the raider flagship. Give us the marked one and we leave. Rian stepped to the comm console, heart hammering. I'm right here. The raider ship broke formation and slammed into the Sirathi flagship, boarding pods punching through armor. They want me, Rian said. I'm not letting others die. He didn't finish before he was running. Ember flew beside him now. Not a helpless hatchling, but a growing dragon with claws sharp. Enough to score metal. They met the raiders in a corridor filled with smoke and sparking cables. The Gloamwing were Sirathi twisted by centuries of exile augmented, brutal, eyes flat with practiced cruelty. Their leader stepped forward. So the human carries our sacred chain. Rian's marks ignited, light pouring. Off his skin in steady waves. It's not a chain. It's a choice. The leader lunged. Rian didn't try to kill. He blocked, took hits, healed, stood again. Embers flamed small but fierce forced attackers back when they tried to flank. Rian's light flooded the corridor, bright enough to make shadows impossible. The Gloamwing leader struck and struck, until rage turned to exhaustion. Finally, it stopped, panting. Why won't you end this? It snarled. Rian's voice came out hoarse. Because ending people is easy, saving them is hard. He extended a hand. Come home. For a heartbeat, something human flickered in the leader's eyes, something like remembered warmth. Then it dimmed into ash. Too late for me. The leader said quietly and turned to the younger raiders behind it. Stand down. Weapons clattered to the deck. The battle ended not with slaughter, but surrender. Havenline survived. Rian found his sister days later, alive, soot-streaked, shaking as she threw her arms around him, and then immediately froze when she saw Ember behind his shoulder. That's a dragon, she whispered. Ember blinked solemnly and very carefully leaned in to sniff the human children hiding behind their mother's legs. Then she chirped in what sounded suspiciously like hello. Rian laughed, half sob. Yeah, long story. Months passed. Havenline rebuilt under coalition protection. Trade routes shifted as species realized they could bargain together instead of separately. The Cull Syndicate's influence cracked, not shattered, but cracked. And on Cinderhold, the Hall of Guardians filled again. Not with armies. With stories. Appa. Crystal-bodied Korin who tunneled into a collapse to pull miners free. A human reactor tech who sealed a breach at the cost of her own health. A stranger from the edge of charted space who held a refugee line long enough for evacuation. One by one, faint new patterns appeared under new skins. Ash bonded. Marked not by conquest, but by choice. Ember grew into herself, wings broad, scales deep sapphire edged in gold. The elders began speaking of her future with reverence and fear. Yet every night she still curled near Rian's door, as if the palace didn't matter, as if crowns were less important than the person who had run into flame because she cried. One evening, watching the volcano light paint the city in amber, Speaker Shenra approached Rian. You changed us, she said. Rian flexed his hands, still a mechanic's hands, calloused and practical. The marks glowed softly beneath his skin like a second pulse. I didn't mean to. That is why it worked, Shenra said. You did not chase meaning, you answered need. Rian looked up as Ember swooped overhead, practicing tight turns against the ash-orange sky. She caught the light and flashed like a living gem. He thought about who he'd been. A tired man in a duct, cursing a broken line, dreaming of a quiet visit home. He thought about who he was now. Still tired, still practical, still stubborn, just carrying a bond that refused to let him walk away when someone cried. Rian smiled. Despite everything, maybe the galaxy didn't need heroes who wanted to be heroes. Maybe. It just needed people who stood up again and again.